All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Amy Drake. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am the Senior Program Officer for Community Grants in Southern Oregon at the Oregon Community Foundation, and I am based out of our Medford office. This information session today is for applicants interested in applying for funding for the 2026 strategic track of the Reed and Carolee Walker Fund. Just a few housekeeping items to share before we start. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our Walker Fund page on the OCF website, except for the live Q&A portion at the end. All participants are on mute and cameras are turned off. And please feel free to turn on the transcriptions in your settings if needed. For the first portion of our time together, we'll have a presentation that will touch on the key pieces of the 2026 strategic track and highlight what the advisory committee looks for in strong applications. The second portion of our time together will be answering questions via a live Q&A. We ask that you hold off on sending questions through the Q&A feature until we reach that portion of the presentation. All right, so I've already introduced myself, but I did want to take a moment to introduce my colleague, Peter Kukla.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Kukla. My pronouns are he, they. I'm the Associate Program Officer for Community Grants. I'm based in our OCF's Eugene office, serving the Southern Willamette Valley, but I'm also here on the Walker team, helping provide administrative and technical support to our entire process. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So before we dive in too much to the Walker Fund, I did want to take a moment to express my gratitude for Lynn Henyon. Many folks in Southern Oregon and across the state knew Lynn for her advocacy and championship of early childhood education here in Jackson County and across Oregon, and as a civic leader and financial professional. Lynn passed away a few weeks ago on January 23rd, and we already feel her absence deeply. OCF CEO Lisa Mensa reflected that Lynn represented the best of what we mean when we talk about Oregon's caring community. She gave herself fully to improving people's lives wherever she served, especially the lives of children. Her kindness and integrity never wavered, and Oregon is a better place because of her life of service. I just really appreciated those words from Lisa and wanted to share them. Lynn served on OCF's board of directors from 2002 through 2011. And Lynn was the incoming OCF board member for Southern Oregon when the Walker Fund was established, alongside outgoing Southern Oregon board member Bill Thorndike. And here in Jackson County, we have both Lynn and Bill together to thank for OCF's decision to establish the Walker Fund as its own grant program at OCF, led by local committee members. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about Reed and Carolee Walker. The Reed and Carolee Walker Fund of Oregon Community Foundation was established in 2003 by a generous bequest from Ashland residents Reed and Carolee. They desired that the Walker Fund would focus on people, particularly children, living on low incomes in Jackson County. The Walker Fund awards approximately $2 million annually, focused on Jackson County nonprofits. Born and raised in Kansas City, Reed was the son of bakery owners who sold their business to Anheuser-Busch in the early 1940s. The family was paid in stock, with Reed receiving 1/3 of that stock, and they moved to California. Reed met Carolee several years later, and they settled in Ashland in 1988. Reed and Carolee both invested in their new community. Reed had a beloved wood shop, and Carolee was an avid gardener. Reed supported educational efforts for children, and he served on various nonprofit boards focused on helping those experiencing poverty. Carolee deeply believed that effort and persistence could turn lives around, and her philanthropy ranged from arts education programming to helping with basic needs. When Reed and Carolee had both passed away, it was that same Anheuser-Busch stock that came to OCF to establish the Walker Fund. It was valued at the time at $37 million, and that fund continues to grow as it consistently distributes more than $2 million annually in Jackson County. We are just so incredibly grateful to Reed and Carolee and the legacy that they've created here in our community. So Reed and Carolee, as I just shared, care deeply about Jackson County community and particularly about children and families. And as such, the Walker Fund supports organizations serving people, particularly children, living on low incomes in Jackson County. You can reference the OCF website and program guidelines for more specific information. And today I'm sharing an overview focused on the strategic track for the Walker Fund. Awards for the strategic track will range from $10,000 to $50,000. We anticipate that the average award size will be around $20,000. There's approximately $1 million available to distribute via the strategic track, and so we anticipate making approximately 50 awards this grant cycle. Eligibility for the strategic track remains fairly broad. Organizations are eligible to apply year after year, even if you received funding in 2025. We do not impose a sit-out period for the Walker Fund. Additionally, if you received funding from other OCF programs or from OCF donors, you are also still welcome to apply to the Walker Fund. This includes receiving support from other programs like our Community Grants Program, a Donor Advised Fund, Thriving Entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. The one piece of ineligibility that I want to be sure to share is that organizations are ineligible to apply for the strategic track if they've already been invited to apply for the sustaining track. Walker only accepts one application per year from any organization. Applications for this cycle opened earlier this week on Monday, February 9th, and they will close at 5 p.m. sharp on Monday, March 9th. OCF will notify applicants in mid-May about the results of their decision-making. So the Walker Fund Strategic Track will support two different grant types. The first is program support for ongoing, new, or expanded programming. And the second is capacity building and organizational enhancement. So I wanted to share a couple examples of what these grant types could look like. It could be a continuation of an early literacy program focused on elementary students who are living on low incomes in West Medford. It could be ongoing financial counseling services for low-income clients across Jackson County. It could be to hire a new staff member to grow the organization's ability to serve community in Jackson County. So again, the two grant types really focus in on program support or capacity building for organizations. I do want to share a little bit more about eligibility too. And so like many of OCF's grant programs, 501c3 organizations, tribal entities, and government entities are eligible to apply. Organizations may work with a 501c3 fiscal sponsor to apply as well. If working with a fiscal sponsor, then applicants must submit formal paperwork confirming that relationship with their application. And these fiscal sponsorship materials will not be accepted past the application deadline of March 9th. There are some areas of work that the Walker Fund typically does not fund, and it is heartbreaking every grant cycle when we see applications representing these focus areas. And so some of the most common reasons for a decline are proposals that request funding for these four things. So the first is activities focused on serving the general population. Again, Walker focuses on people, particularly children, living on low incomes. The second major reason for a decline is when applications request funding for activities that occur outside of Jackson County or for non-Jackson County community members. And so again, every cycle we do see applicants and applications that focus on some of the surrounding geographies. And Reading Carolee in their will were very clear about their intent to focus on Jackson County only. Another common reason for a decline is applications that request funding for activities that occur outside of the grant period. And this year, the grant period will be that May 2026 through May 2027 window. And these are one-year grants for the strategic track. And then last but not least, one of the most common reasons for a decline for the Walker Fund is when proposals request funding for capital expenses. And the Walker Fund views capital expenses as things such as construction costs, furniture purchases, equipment purchases, vehicle purchases, technology upgrades, and so on and so forth. The full list of proposals typically not funded can be found on page 4 of the RFP. The Walker Fund is overseen by an advisory committee in partnership with OCF program staff. This advisory committee is made up of Jackson County community members, and together, program staff and the advisory committee together assess competitive applications by the review criteria for their alignment with the OCF Walker Fund strategic guidelines, funding priorities, and potential community impact. Together, the advisory committee and program staff develop grant recommendations for the consideration of OCF's board of directors. The advisory committee provides community expertise and perspective in grant making. This committee plays an important role in fostering a sense of belonging and building community bridges in Jackson County. I wanted to share a bit about the qualifications that all committee members demonstrate. And these include an appreciation for a variety of charitable activities in the community, curiosity about how to leverage private philanthropy to solve community problems, expertise to help guide OCF to achieve Walker goals, and knowledge of Jackson County, its nonprofit sector, and the variety and complexity of community needs here in our community, particularly in the areas of serving those living on low incomes and children. So for the strategic grant track, there are 4 major components that will determine competitiveness. And these are, as you can see on the slide, community-focused work, community representation, community engagement, and the project budget. And the advisory committee will use these criteria when they're assessing applications, both for their alignment and for their competitiveness in this 2026 grant cycle. And I'm going to talk through each of these a little bit. So for community-focused work, here what the advisory committee is assessing is in the proposal is its fit with the Walker Fund intent of serving people, particularly children, living on low incomes in Jackson County. Applications without the specific intention to do this are often less competitive, and particularly those that again serve the general population. Applications that include work outside of Jackson County are, again, not eligible for support. For community representation, here the advisory committee is evaluating how the people your proposal will serve are involved in determining the direction and activities of that proposal. There's some questions that come up in the review process, such as, did the applicant make a deep effort to bring in folks from that community to help lead your approach? Did the applicant talk with community partners who have expertise, but who are not necessarily the community themselves? Are opportunities for input and community engagement deep and ongoing, or are they a little more occasional and happenstance? Those are just some of the questions and the ways that the advisory committee considers community representation. For community engagement, here the advisory committee is learning how the organization is viewed within the community served, and particularly looking at if the organization is viewed as part of and an extension of the community, or if the organization is viewed as outside and separate from the community. And the strongest proposals will be those where the community served views the proposal activities and the organization as an integral part of that community, rather than coming in from the outside. And finally, for project budget, the advisory committee is responsible for wise stewardship of the Walker Fund. And so they must analyze how the projected income and expenses align with the proposal activities and with community needs. While there is no match required for Walker funding, the advisory committee does often prefer to see other sources of funding in addition to the proposed Walker funding. Even when those sources are pending or planned or in kind, those are still supportive in crafting your project budget. You can view the full review criteria and scoring rubric on page 9 of the RFP, and I highly recommend that you do as you're crafting your application. Each criteria also has notation about where in the application the advisory committee will look in their evaluation process. And this tool was developed in part to increase transparency with you all as applicants about the Walker Fund review process. So as you may know, OCF has launched an exciting new My OCF portal for our nonprofits. And this is where you apply for any grant program, almost any grant program at OCF. If you need help changing a password or in accessing an existing page for your nonprofit, please contact our grants administration team through the grants@oregoncf.org email address, and our grants administration team will be able to support you. If you have saved your application to complete later and you're having trouble finding it, look for the form in process on the application history tab of the nonprofits page. If you're a brand new nonprofit that has never applied to an OCF grant program before, please know it can take us a little more time to help you get set up. In this case, with our new portal, we're asking you to plan for an additional week of response time. Please do not wait until the application deadline because we may run out of time to be able to get you set up. And then even if you are not a new nonprofit, we absolutely encourage submitting your application as early as possible to allow for any potential challenges connecting to our new system or any technology surprises. Okay, so I wanted to share a couple of frequently asked questions as well. And these are some of the most common questions that I receive from applicants in every Walker cycle. So the first is, are there reporting requirements? And no, there are no reporting requirements for the strategic track. I do anticipate that many applicants will apply year after year. And yeah, there are no reporting requirements at this time. An additional question that I'm receiving a lot this cycle with a new structure for the grant program is, how competitive is the strategic track? And so what I can share is data from 2025. Community needs far exceed the program budget. In 2025, applicants experienced a 40% decline rate and a 60% success rate. Due to the high volume of submission, organizations with the most competitive applications will be awarded funds in 2026, and partial funding is absolutely possible. And this decline rate, this 40% decline rate, is in part why we aim to be transparent with the review criteria and the scoring rubric, so that you can have a clear view of what the advisory committee is looking for and how they are scoring applications, and as well so that you can be really intentional and strategic about how you frame your application and how you decide whether or not to apply for the Walker Fund. An additional common question is, once I submit my application, will there be any follow-up? OCF staff and the advisory committee are unlikely to, but may contact you or your organization's fiscal sponsor for potentially two reasons. One is if something is missing or entered incorrectly for legal purposes, or two, if there are major questions from the application narrative or the budget section. As I mentioned, this is an unlikely part of the process. And for clarification, we do not conduct site visits as part of the review process for the Walker Fund. And the last frequently asked question is, how can I get feedback on my declined application? And this comes up cycle after cycle. And so once notifications are sent out by OCF in mid-May about the OCF board's final decisions, you can reach out to me to request feedback on your application. I'm happy to pass along information that the advisory committee shared in their review process. Just please note that I do receive many requests for feedback, and so you may receive a response in either written form or through a follow-up meeting. Okay, so as we wrap up with the presentation and begin to transition into the Q&A portion, I just wanted to highlight Walker's incredible impact across Jackson County in the 23 years of the fund. This 2026 cycle, will bring us to 43 million distributed in more than 1,100 grants. And we are so excited to support you and support the advisory committee through this grant cycle process. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us here today. As we wrap up the presentation portion of this info session, we wanted to once again point you to the resources online. So you can reference the Walker page on the OCF website or the program guidelines for more specific information. Okay, and so now that we've covered some of the basics and given you an insight into what the advisory committee looks for when reviewing applications, we're ready to open up the Q&A for your questions, and that'll be the Q&A feature in Zoom. And so I encourage you to prioritize questions that are broad, as your responses will be shared publicly with others in this info session. If you have questions that are specific to your proposal or your organization, I encourage you to email me instead at adrake, ADRAKE, at oregoncf.org instead, so that we can have a more in-depth conversation about your questions. So now I will turn my camera off and focus on the Q&A and responding to your questions there. Thank you so much.